On March 15th, 1963, the air carried a biting chill, but the streets of New York pulsed with life as they always did. Samuel adjusted the collar of his thrift store jacket, feeling the weight of the night ahead pressing on his shoulders. His best friend Jason strutted confidently beside him, the party invite crumpled in his fist like a golden ticket to a world Samuel had only dreamt of. This wasn't just any party, it was her party. Sarah Colleen. The name sounded like a melody in Samuel's head, one he'd replayed too many times. Her laughter, the way her hair caught the sunlight in homeroom, the way she looked at him or didn't. She was untouchable, radiant, and way out of his league. "You good, man?" Jason asked, lighting a cigarette with an air of nonchalance Samuel could never master. Jason was the kind of guy who didn't have to try. Girls liked him without effort. Hell, everyone liked him without effort. Samuel nodded, shoving his hands deep into his pockets to hide how badly they were shaking. "Yeah, just don't let me make an ass of myself, okay?" Jason smirked, exhaling a cloud of smoke into the night. "You? Never. Just don't start quoting Shakespeare or some shit, and you'll be fine." Sarah Colleen's house wasn't far from where Samuel lived, near Riverside Church and the peaceful expanse of Sakura Park. The sight of the cherry blossoms in full bloom had always been Samuel's sanctuary. He'd sit under the trees, sketching or just dreaming of a life that didn't feel so goddamn small. But tonight wasn't about dreaming. Tonight was about Sarah, about proving to himself that he wasn't just some kid who melted into the background. As they walked, Samuel felt the city's rhythm sync with his heartbeat. Erratic, hopeful, and a little bit terrified. This was his shot, his turning point. He couldn't screw it up. The night was cold, but the tension between Jason and Samuel was burning hot as they neared Sarah Colleen's house. The dim glow of porch lights outlined a gathering of silhouettes inside, laughter and music spilling out onto the street. Samuel's stomach churned. This was it, the moment he'd been building up in his head for weeks, maybe months. "Are you scared?" Jason's voice broke through his thoughts, laced with that cocky edge he always carried. "Hell yeah, man." Samuel admitted, flashing a nervous smile that didn't quite reach his eyes. Jason smirked, taking a long drag from his cigarette. "Yeah, well, she is the hottest girl in school. I'll be shocked if she even knows your name, let alone starts dating you. You sure you want to do this?" Samuel swallowed the lump in his throat and nodded. "I do. I think I can get her to go out with me." Jason let out a sharp laugh. "You're crazy. Seriously, you think Sarah is going to pick you over all those other guys? The football team? The band kids? Hell, even that weirdo David she used to date? Why would she pick you?" Samuel stopped walking, his sneakers scuffing against the pavement as he turned to face Jason. "Because I'm not like everyone else. I'm different." Jason cocked an eyebrow, his smirk widening. "Besides being ugly, what exactly do you mean by different?" Samuel chuckled under his breath, looking down as if the answer were written on the sidewalk. "Every Sunday I see her at church, but she doesn't know I'm there too." Jason blinked. "Okay, Ann, what's your point?" Samuel hesitated, his voice dropping to a near whisper. "I'm a virgin." Jason stopped dead in his tracks, his expression a mix of disbelief and amusement. "Bro, what? Speak up. I didn't catch that." Samuel exhaled sharply, his face flushing crimson. "I said, I'm a virgin." Jason let out a loud, cackling laugh that echoed down the empty street. "No way. No fucking way. You're a virgin? That's priceless, man." He clapped Samuel on the shoulder. "I thought you were just awkward, but damn, that explains so much." Samuel's cheeks burned as he shoved Jason's hand off. "Man, shut up. It's not a big deal." Jason wiped a fake tear from his eye, still grinning. "Not a big deal? Sam, you're chasing after the hottest girl in school and you've never even kissed anyone? What if she's not, like you? She's dated, man. She's probably been with David or someone else. I mean, no offense, but no girl who looks like that is still a virgin." "You're wrong," Samuel said firmly, looking down at his shoes. "She's different. I know it." Jason squinted at him like he was studying a puzzle he couldn't quite solve. "You sound real sentimental right now. Kinda gay, honestly." He nodded toward Sarah's house, where the party was in full swing. I bet I can make that sweet-ass mine tonight." Samuel's head snapped up, his irritation flaring. "Hey, that's enough, Jason." Jason held up his hands in mock surrender. "Relax, man. I'm just joking. You need to learn how to take a joke. His grin turned mischievous. Come on, let's get inside. I heard the jocks are selling pot in the backyard. Samuel sighed, following Jason toward the glowing house. His nerves were jangling like loose wires, but deep down, he knew he couldn't back out now. This wasn't about Jason or the jocks or anyone else. It was about Sarah, and proving that maybe, just maybe, he was worth noticing. The moment Jason shoved open the front door, Samuel was hit with a wave of music, laughter, and the unmistakable scent of cheap beer mixed with cigarette smoke. The boombox perched on the fireplace blasted old-school hip-hop, the bass thumping so hard it vibrated in his chest. Jason didn't hesitate, making a beeline for the jocks gathered near the kitchen, already in the middle of a crude drinking game. Later, man, Jason tossed over his shoulder, leaving Samuel to fend for himself. Samuel stood frozen for a moment, scanning the crowded room. The energy was electric, but he felt entirely out of place. He tugged at the sleeves of his jacket and glanced around, hoping to catch a glimpse of Sarah. She wasn't in the living room or anywhere near the main crowd. Anxiety gnawed at him, but determination nudged him forward. Just find her. Say something simple, and don't look like a complete idiot. He hesitated briefly before deciding to explore the house. He slipped through the edges of the crowd unnoticed and wandered down a quieter hallway. The chaos of the party faded behind him, replaced by the muffled sounds of distant laughter and his own nervous heartbeat. The walls were lined with framed photos, Sarah with her friends, at family vacations, and in cheerleading uniforms. Samuel couldn't help but smile. These snapshots of her life were like little windows into a world he wished he could be part of. But as his eyes landed on a particular photo, a younger, slightly chubbier Sarah grinning brightly at the camera, he heard a door creak open behind him. He spun around, startled, and there she was, Sarah Colleen. She stepped out of the bathroom, looking as effortlessly gorgeous as ever in a casual sweater and jeans. Her hair framed her face perfectly, and her lips curved into a puzzled smile as she noticed him. Samuel froze, realizing too late how obvious it was that he'd been staring at her photos. His gaze darted away, cheeks flushing. "Embarrassing, right?" she said suddenly. "Sorry, I didn't mean to look," he stammered, stepping back like he'd been caught doing something criminal. Sarah tilted her head, confused. "Wait, what?" "I meant the photo." She gestured to the one he'd been studying. "I was a little chunkier back then. My parents loved it, though. Said I looked like a hamster, small and fat." She laughed softly, her voice carrying a self-deprecating warmth that caught Samuel off guard. He blinked, unsure of how to respond. You weren't fat," he blurted, then immediately cringed at how dumb he sounded. "I mean, you looked happy, really happy." Her eyes softened, and for a moment, the air between them shifted. "Yeah, I guess I was," she admitted. "It's just weird, seeing yourself like that." Samuel nodded, his nerves easing slightly. "I think it's kind of cool. Like, it shows where you've been, who you were before." He paused, realizing how much he was rambling. "Sorry, I probably sound like an idiot." To his surprise, Sarah smiled. A real one, not the polite kind she flashed in the yearbook photos. "No, you don't. You sound different." She studied him for a moment, her eyes narrowing slightly as if trying to place him. "Wait, you're Jason's friend, right?" Yeah, Samuel," he said quickly, holding out his hand awkwardly. He dragged me here." Sarah shook his hand, her grip surprisingly firm. "Well, welcome to the chaos, Samuel." She glanced over her shoulder toward the party noise. "So what's your plan for tonight? Drink with the jocks? Raid the snack table?" He hesitated, caught off guard by her teasing tone. "Honestly, I was just looking for you." Her eyebrows lifted in surprise. "Me?" "Yeah," he admitted, his voice shaky but sincere. I think you're amazing, and I wanted to talk to you. I know it's random and probably weird, but I thought maybe I'd regret it if I didn't." Sarah stared at him for a moment, her expression unreadable. Then, a small smile tugged at her lips. "Well, Samuel," she said, crossing her arms, "you've got my attention. Let's see what you've got." Samuel's heart hammered in his chest. This was either going to be the best or worst night of his life. Samuel sat on the weathered park bench, his body frail, but his presence steady, as if the weight of his years anchored him to the earth. The pigeons gathered around him, pecking at the seeds he scattered absently at his feet. The golden light of the late afternoon bathed everything in a warmth that mocked the cold hollowness in his chest. A chuckle escaped his lips, unbidden, as a memory surfaced like a fleeting dream. He could see her so clearly. Sarah, standing just a few feet away, gasping in mock horror as a pigeon had once landed squarely on her head. She'd screamed, flailed her arms dramatically, and then laughed so hard she doubled over, tears streaming down her face. He turned instinctively, his voice trembling with anticipation. "Honey, do you remember?" The words died in his throat as the cruel truth slapped him across the face. She wasn't there. She hadn't been there for years. The empty space beside him on the bench felt colder, heavier, like a void that swallowed all sound, all warmth. "Oh," he murmured, his voice cracking as he leaned back against the bench, his shoulders sagging under the invisible weight of grief. "That's right." His hands trembled as he wiped his face, though the tears kept coming. He glanced at the horizon, where the setting sun painted the sky in hues of orange and pink, and he spoke to the air, to the wind, to the ghosts of his memories. "Sarah," he whispered, his voice thick with longing. "I miss you so damn much. I keep waiting, every day, for that sign you promised. You said I'd know it when I saw it. But where are you, love? Can you hear me at all? Are you even here?" His voice faltered, and his gaze dropped to the wrinkled hands in his lap, the hands that had once held her so tightly. The memory of her smile, soft, reassuring, full of life, came to him slowly, like sunlight filtering through a canopy of trees. He clung to it, desperate to keep it from fading. The world seemed to blur around him as the memory bloomed fully in his mind, transporting him back to that night, that fateful party, where it had all begun. The night he'd found the courage to speak to her, to lay bare his heart in a way he never thought possible. The night Sarah Colleen had looked at him, not as the awkward, nervous boy he saw in the mirror, but as someone who mattered. He closed his eyes, letting the past wash over him, the pain of her absence momentarily dulled by the beauty of what they'd shared. But even in his memories, the ache lingered, a cruel reminder of the life they'd built together and the cruel twist of time that had taken her from him. The pigeons cooed softly at his feet, oblivious to the heartache unfolding above them. The room was heavy with silence, broken only by the soft hum of the machines that no longer served a purpose. Samuel's trembling hands cradled hers, their warmth fading, her touch slipping away like sand through his fingers. Her breaths were shallow, each one a struggle, but her eyes, oh, her eyes, still held the spark of the woman he had loved for a lifetime. "Sammy," she whispered, her voice so faint it barely reached his ears. He leaned in closer, his tears splashing onto the frail hand he refused to let go of. "I'm going to see you one last time after my passing." His throat tightened, and his voice cracked as he asked, "How is that?" A soft smile, a shadow of the vibrant one he remembered, curved her lips. Using what little strength she had left, she whispered, "I'll be by Sakura Park. Wait for me, and I'll be the white butterfly flying around you and landing on your head before flying away." He let out a soft, bittersweet laugh, his chest tightening as the words settled over him like a final promise. "Ha ha! Like the pigeon?" She nodded weakly, her eyelids fluttering as the light began to dim in her gaze. "You made me so happy," she breathed, her voice barely audible now. Her smile lingered, but only for a moment. Then it faded, her features softening into an eternal peace. "Sarah," Samuel whispered, his voice breaking as he shook her hand gently. "Sarah, my love." The nurse, who had been standing quietly in the corner, stepped forward and gently checked for a pulse. Her expression softened as she placed a hand on Samuel's shoulder. "I'm so sorry," she said, her tone laced with the quiet empathy of someone who had witnessed this moment too many times before. Samuel didn't respond. His world had stopped moving the second Sarah's chest had stilled. All he could do was sit there, clutching her hand, willing time to reverse, the universe to change its mind. His voice trembled as he whispered to her lifeless form, "I promise you, Sarah, I'll wait for you in Sakura Park. I'll be there." Before Samuel concludes his final bag of crumbs, a faint voice behind him speaks. "Excuse me?" He turns around, his heart leaping in his chest, but there's no one there. His eyes flicker through the park, scanning the empty space behind him. Maybe he had imagined the voice. But when he turns back around, he's startled to find a small Asian girl standing right in front of him. "Oh, I apologize, mister," she says with a soft, polite tone. "Wow, you scared me. I didn't see you there." Samuel responds, his heart still racing. Sir, can you help me? Samuel quickly searches the area, his eyes darting back and forth. No one else seems to be around, and certainly no one appears to be looking for her. He glances at the girl again, his concern growing. Where is your mother? Are you all right? She looks up at him with a perplexed expression. I don't know. Samuel is thrown off, unsure what she means by that, but the uncertainty gnaws at him. He stands and scans the park one last time, trying to piece things together. Still, no one is coming for the girl. What's your name? May asks, her voice cutting through the silence. Samuel. My name is Mei Lee. Mei Lee is such a beautiful name. Thank you, she smiles, closing her eyes tightly as she expresses an adorable expression, so innocent that it catches Samuel off guard. Are you lost, May? Samuel asks gently, his concern deepening. I don't know, she replies, her eyes blank as though she isn't fully sure of the situation. Samuel is baffled. How could a lost girl not realize she was lost? His mind churns with confusion, trying to figure out the girl's strange behavior. He examines her carefully. She seems fine, no tears, no distress. Just a little girl who seems out of place. She's just lost. But something feels off, like there's more going on here than meets the eye. Samuel kneels down to her eye level, trying to make the conversation feel more comfortable. What is your mother's name, May? Ami Kwan, I think. Samuel's brow furrows. Do you know her telephone number? No, do you? Samuel almost laughs at her question, but it feels too real to be a joke. The girl's tone is sincere and her confusion seems genuine. Do you know where you live? He tries again. I believe so. He raises an eyebrow, still unsure of what's going on. How old are you, May? I'm 8, I think. Why do you think so? Are you okay? Yeah, I remember. Yesterday was my birthday, so I am now 8 years old. She beams up at him, a little proud. Wow, happy belated birthday. Samuel smiles, his heart lightening a little as he sees her happiness. Can you help me find my mother? She asks, her voice filled with the same uncertainty. I would love to help you, but I think we should call someone first. May's face falls slightly as she retreats back, her expression turning nervous. Oh, honey, don't be scared. They'll help you, I promise. Samuel's voice softens, trying to reassure her. Will I be punished? She asks, a quiet fear in her eyes. Samuel's heart aches at the question. Punished? Why would a little girl be worried about punishment? No, I promise you they won't. If they do, I'll go to jail myself, he says, trying to lighten the mood with a small chuckle. His attempt at humor is weak, but May's anxious expression softens a little. She looks at him cautiously, but then nods, seemingly comforted by the idea that he'd protect her. Samuel pulls out his phone, ready to make the call to the local police. He glances at Mei Lee once more, his stomach twisting with unease. Something is wrong, and he can't shake the feeling that he's about to step into a situation far bigger than he ever expected. Samuel sat on the park bench, his mind racing, every thought looping back to the mysterious girl. The image of her standing in front of him, asking for help, seemed so vivid in his mind, yet she had vanished without a trace. His phone call with Stephen had seemed so urgent, and yet, as soon as he tried to explain the situation, things had taken a strange turn. The officers had arrived, one of them, Officer Jordan, asking all the right questions, but Samuel could sense an underlying skepticism in her tone. As the conversation continued, it felt like they were treating him like some confused old man, or worse, someone who might be inventing the entire situation out of boredom. He didn't blame them for being cautious. It sounded bizarre, even to him. A lost child approaching a stranger like that? It didn't make sense. After Jordan and Tony finished questioning him, Samuel was left with a thick sense of unease. Mei Lee's absence gnawed at him, but it was the way the officers had treated him, like he might be imagining the whole thing, that left him feeling worse. They seemed to be skeptical about the whole thing, dismissing the strange encounter with the little girl as something that couldn't possibly be real. Samuel, why don't you take the card and head home? Jordan suggested, her tone softening. I'll wait here, just a little longer, Samuel replied. All right, she said, not pushing the matter any further. If you see anything or hear anything, please don't hesitate to call us again. With that, the officers walked away, leaving Samuel to sit in the park, his mind still reeling from everything. The silence that settled around him seemed unnervingly heavy. He couldn't shake the feeling that something was terribly wrong, But what was it? As the hours passed, Samuel felt himself drifting into a daze, exhaustion creeping in. After an hour, Jordan and Tony returned to their patrol car, defeated. No one had seen anything unusual, and there were no reports of a missing child. No Mei Lee. In the car, Tony let out a laugh, cutting through the silence. Really? An Asian little girl asking for help from a lonely old man? Tony chuckled, clearly not taking the situation seriously. Jordan, her focus more on the oddness of the case, didn't respond right away. She was still deep in thought. "You think it was a prank?" she asked, her voice slow and deliberate. "It could have been, yeah," Tony replied, still shaking his head. "Or maybe just another weird call from some bored old guy." Jordan's lips pressed into a thin line. She didn't like how easily Tony dismissed the case. She knew the world was a strange place, and there were far too many things that couldn't be explained by simple logic. "You remember that missing girl case from last year? Right here at this park?" Jordan asked. Tony's eyes widened. "Wait, that was here. How come I didn't hear about that?" Jordan glanced at him with a knowing look. "Exactly. You don't pay attention. What if the old guy saw something? Or maybe." Tony's voice trailed off, but he didn't finish his thought. Jordan sighed and started the car. "I don't think it was him. Too frail to kidnap a child, and that's not his type of thing anyway. But still, weird things happen." As they drove away, the radio crackled to life. A voice on the other end confirmed that there were no reports of anyone missing in the area or anyone matching the description of Mei Lee. No records, no history, nothing. Tony raised an eyebrow at the report, but Jordan didn't say anything more. She kept driving, but in the back of her mind, she couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something wasn't right. Could it really have all been a misunderstanding? Or was there something darker lurking beneath the surface, hidden from their view? For now, the case would stay open, but as they drove off into the night, Jordan couldn't stop wondering, what if Samuel White had seen something real? Samuel trudged up the steps, his tired body leaning heavily against the railings for support as he ascended. His fingers fumbled with his rear pockets, and with a small sigh, his keys slipped from his hand, clattering to the ground. He closed his eyes for a moment, taking a deep breath as he knelt down to retrieve them. The simple action of bending down, of lifting something so small, felt like a chore. His heart felt heavier than ever, each moment reminding him of the piece of himself that had died with his wife. After a long pause, he stood slowly, the weight of his fatigue pressing down on him. He struggled with the door, his hands shaking slightly as he turned the key in the lock. Finally, the door creaked open, and Samuel stepped inside. The house felt colder than usual, emptier, as though his wife's presence had left an indelible void behind. He hung his coat on the rack beside hers, a silent reminder of the life they once shared. His movements were slow, deliberate, as he sank into the lazy-boy chair, his body sinking into its worn fabric. He flicked the television on, but he wasn't really watching. The local news ran in the background, but he barely heard it, his thoughts drifting. His eyelids grew heavy, and the soothing hum of the television almost lulled him to sleep. But then, a breaking news report snapped him awake. The voice of the anchor filtered through the static of his half-sleep. In today's breaking headlines on New York 7, a live report of a possibly missing female has been received. Mei Lee, approximately 8 years old, petite, with short black hair, was last seen wearing a blue dress in Sakura Park before vanishing without a trace. If you have any information, please contact your local police department. A photograph has not been received yet, and no additional details have been released. The words struck him, but it was the description that made his heart stir uneasily. "Blue dress," the reporter said, but Samuel knew it was wrong. He knew it. The girl wasn't wearing a blue dress. His brows furrowed in frustration, a familiar ache growing in his chest as he grabbed his wallet from his pocket. His fingers fumbled through the leather, pulling out the card Jordan had given him. He dialed Jordan's number, his fingers pressing the screen with a sense of urgency. "Hello, you've reached Jordan Smith's cell phone. If this is an emergency, please hang up and dial 911. Please leave your name, message, and phone number, and I will return your call as soon as possible. Thank you very much." The beep of the voicemail left him momentarily irritated, but he composed himself and spoke into the phone. "Hello, yes, it's Samuel White. I reported the missing girl today, and I just saw the news. They referred to her as wearing a blue dress, but that's not right. She was wearing a navy blue blouse, not a dress. Please, I need you to contact them and have them correct it. I'm worried this small mistake could affect their ability to find her. Please, it's important. Thank you." He hung up the phone, staring at the blank screen. Samuel sat there for a moment, the room quiet except for the distant hum of the television. He ran a hand over his face, fighting back the tears that threatened to break free. The grief over his wife, the weariness in his body, the sense of helplessness, it was all too much. And now a child was missing. A child who might never come home. A child whose description was already slipping through the cracks. He closed his eyes, taking a long, steadying breath. Samuel had lost so much, but he knew. He had to keep fighting. For his wife, for Mei Li, for anyone who needed it. The world didn't stop. Neither could he. Samuel stood in the doorway of the room, taking in the sight of his wife's belongings, still scattered as if she had only just stepped out. Her shoes by the bed, her cosmetics on the nightstand, everything was exactly as it had been before she passed. The scent of her perfume still lingered in the air, an uninvited reminder of the life they once shared. His chest tightened, and for a moment, he wondered if it might be time to let go, donate her things to a nearby homeless shelter, as he had thought about before. But each item was a memory, too precious to part with just yet. He walked into the closet, his fingers brushing against the fabrics of her clothes, feeling the weight of her absence. The scent of her perfume filled his lungs, and he closed his eyes, holding onto it, letting it wrap around him like a fragile memory. A tear slid down his cheek as the ache inside him deepened. The scent pulled him back to the day he surprised her for her 25th birthday. He could still see it in his mind's eye. "Don't look," he had said, his voice teasing yet full of love. His hands hovered over her eyes, blocking her view. "What is it?" "I hate surprises, Sammy." "Freaks me out," she'd protested, a gorgeous smile tugging at her lips, one that Samuel would never forget. "All right, you may now look," he had said, pulling his palms away. Her eyes had widened in shock, her jaw dropping as she saw the surprise waiting on the bed. "Sammy! Oh my goodness gracious!" she exclaimed, her voice filled with awe. She slowly walked toward the bed, where a tiny white teacup chihuahua was sitting, her tail wagging energetically. She carefully scooped the tiny dog up, her eyes softening with pure affection. "She is so delicate. Where did you find her, Sammy?" she asked, her voice trembling with joy. Samuel simply shrugged, his signature charming smile never wavering. Nothing mattered more to him than making her happy. "How much was she?" Her voice shifted from excitement to concern, her brow furrowing. "Stop it, Sarah. It's not about the amount of money I spent," he had said, leaning in to kiss her on the forehead. "Only our happy moments matter, nothing more." She had beamed, returning the kiss with an even brighter smile. Looking down at the puppy, she whispered, "Hello, sweetheart. What's your name?" Her gaze turned to Samuel. "What's her name?" "I wanted you to pick the name since I'm terrible at it," Samuel had admitted, still holding her close. "How about Kiwi?" she had asked, her eyes twinkling mischievously. "Kiwi?" he had chuckled, amused by the name. "Yeah, I think that works." "Yes, she's adorable and petite like one, and she tastes delicious," Sarah had giggled. Samuel had raised an eyebrow. "Yeah? Did you eat puppies before?" Wait, she had looked back at Kiwi, shaking her head. "I would never eat our baby girl," she had said, rubbing her nose against Kiwi's, her voice filled with warmth and love. Every time his wife had smiled, Samuel's own heart had expanded. It had been so simple, so pure. Those were the moments that mattered. Now, with the memories of Sarah flooding back, the emptiness around him felt heavier than ever. He held on to the scent of her clothes, clinging to the moments, the joy, the love. Each memory was a fleeting shadow, reminding him that everything had changed, but his heart still held on to the past. Samuel's body trembled as he wept uncontrollably, clutching his wife's used clothing to his chest. The scent of her still clung to the fabric, but it felt like a cruel reminder of the love he had lost. His tears soaked the material as he whispered to himself, barely able to breathe through the weight of the sorrow. "I miss you so much. I don't think I can live without you anymore." His voice cracked, the rawness of his grief overwhelming him. For a moment, it felt like the world had stopped turning. But then, in the silence of his home, he heard something. Something unnerving. A sound that didn't belong. The television flickered, channels changing on their own, the remote control nowhere near him. His heart began to race. Jerking up from the bed, Samuel's panic set in. He hadn't been prepared for this. He wasn't sure what to expect. Someone was in his home. His first instinct was to protect himself. He fumbled for a nearby wooden baseball bat, gripping it tightly, his knuckles turning white from the pressure. Every sound became sharper. Every movement felt more dangerous. He quietly crept toward the living room, his pulse pounding in his ears. The room was eerily still. The television continued to play mindlessly, but no one was there. Samuel's breath caught in his throat. Was someone watching him? He peered around, scanning the shadows for any sign of life. The house was too small, too familiar to be this empty. "I've called the police. They're on their way," Samuel shouted into the silence, hoping his voice would carry enough authority to ward off whatever intruder might be lurking. "My gun is loaded," he added, though he wasn't sure whether the threat would even reach anyone who wasn't there. The only sound left was the hum of the television. Nothing else. He continued to move through the house, every creak of the floorboards sending his heart into overdrive. The bat felt heavier with each step, the weight of his fear nearly unbearable. He checked every corner of his small home, looking for any sign of an intruder. Nothing. Not a soul. Confused and exhausted, Samuel returned to the living room, storing the bat in the corner. His eyes landed on the remote control. Maybe it was malfunctioning. He gently pressed the buttons, checking if any were stuck. Could the TV really have been changing channels on its own? It didn't make sense, but neither did the hole in his heart that Sarah had left behind. He pressed the button to switch off the television, the room returning to silence. He walked to the kitchen and opened the refrigerator, his stomach hollow. Inside, there was little to feed on. Eggs, a half-gallon of milk, some cheese, and butter. A poor excuse for a meal. He hadn't been eating properly since the loss, his appetite having vanished with the life he used to share with his wife. Samuel stood there, staring at the empty space in the fridge, his motivation evaporating. It felt pointless. Eating, existing. It was all meaningless without her. He closed the refrigerator door with a sigh, the emptiness of the house closing in around him once more. His body was screaming for attention. He caught a whiff of his own body odor. The smell was overpowering. He hadn't bothered with the usual daily routines, showering, dressing. Those things had fallen away, as if his own self-care didn't matter anymore. His motivation was gone, buried beneath the weight of his grief. The only thing left was the routine. Slumber. Feeding the birds on the bench, then slumber again. It was the only escape he had left, a way to lose himself in the numbness, away from the pain that was slowly suffocating him. He walked back to the living room, sitting down on the couch again, his eyes fixed on the empty screen. His thoughts scattered, and his body felt like it was slowly sinking deeper into the chair, as if the grief itself was pulling him down, trapping him in the memory of a life he no longer had. Samuel's heart stopped for a moment as he stared at the young girl standing in the doorway. Mei Lee, the missing girl from the news, was casually standing in his living room with an innocent smile on her face, as if nothing was out of place. "I want to watch TV. I'm bored," she said cheerfully, as if she were simply a guest looking for some company. Samuel's breath caught in his throat, his mind racing. He jumped up from the couch in shock, the baseball bat still in the corner. "How did you get in here?" he demanded, his voice shaky but firm, a mix of confusion and frustration flooding him. Mei Lee merely shrugged, an innocent gesture that only heightened Samuel's panic. Samuel's anger bubbled up, but it was quickly overshadowed by the overwhelming sense of responsibility. He could hardly be mad at a little girl, lost, alone, and scared. His emotions swirled into a tight knot of concern and irritation. "Why did you run away, May? You almost got me in trouble," he said, his voice softening as he realized just how deeply her disappearance had affected him. "They're looking for you. The police, the whole city. They're all worried." May's eyes widened in surprise, then a wide grin spread across her face. "Really? Did they find my mommy?" she asked, her voice filled with a naive hope that made Samuel's chest ache. Samuel hesitated. His thoughts were all over the place. He hadn't expected to see her again, especially not like this. No, But, he began, but May interrupted him eagerly. "Let's go see my mommy," she said with a bright beam of excitement. Samuel's mind raced as he tried to process the situation. "Do you know where she is?" he asked, his voice laced with uncertainty. Mei Li nodded enthusiastically, her eyes shining with clarity. "Yeah, I do. I remember now. She is nearby," she exclaimed, as if it were the most natural thing in the world. Samuel's heart skipped a beat. His instincts screamed at him to be cautious. This didn't make sense. The girl had been missing for who knows how long, and now here she was, talking about her mother like it was no big deal. But there was something in her eyes, something that made Samuel's heart swell with a strange mix of hope and dread. Was she really okay? Had she been through something unimaginable? And now she was offering him the opportunity to help her find her mother. If he could believe her. Samuel stood there, his mind spinning. "All right, May, let's go see your mom," he finally said, though his voice was heavy with doubt. He had no idea what he was walking into, but at that moment, he knew he couldn't let the little girl down. She was lost, and so was he, grief-stricken and broken, but perhaps, just maybe, this could give him something to hold on to. "Okay," May said brightly, her excitement making her seem so much older than her years. "This way." She bounced toward the door, clearly certain of where she was going, as if the world hadn't fallen apart around her just hours before. Samuel glanced back at the empty house, at the void his wife had left, and then at Mei Li, who was leading him towards something unknown. As he followed her, he couldn't help but wonder, what was he about to uncover? Was this a sign, or was it just another step down a dark path? But for now, all he could do was follow her.